In this problem, we need to solve the equation 3x squared plus 24 equals negative 36. What type of equation do I have here? Notice the highest exponent on an x is a 2, so it's a quadratic equation, and we normally solve those by either factoring or the quadratic formula. But in this case, where I have an x squared term and then just numbers, there's no plain x term, we can solve it by a quicker method, and that is using the square root property. Now, the square root property for solving quadratic equations, it can only be used if the equation can be written in this format, u squared equals d, where u is an algebraic expression and d is a non-zero real number. So what we do in these cases, first of all, we isolate the squared expression on one side of the equation and the number on the other, so it looks just like this. So once we have u squared equals d, then we just take the square roots of both sides and we land up with u equals plus or minus the square root of d. It's very important to remember to put in this plus or minus because there are two solutions to this equation here. So let's apply this method to our problem here. And so I need to isolate this all by itself to start with. So the first thing I'm going to have to do is subtract 24 from both sides. And I get 3x squared equals negative 36 minus 24 is negative 60. Now I'm almost done isolating the x squared term. The only thing left to do is to divide both sides by 3. So I get x squared equals negative 60 divided by 3 is negative 20. Now I've isolated the x squared term. All I have to do is take the square roots of both sides. So I get the square root of x squared equals plus or minus, don't forget your plus or minus, the square root of negative 20. Well, what is the square root of x squared? They undo each other, so I get x equals plus or minus. Whenever you have the square root of a negative number, the first thing you do in simplifying is pull out the square root of negative 1 is I. So I get plus or minus I, the square root of positive 20. Now all we have to do is simplify the square root of 20. 20 is not a perfect square, but can I factor it into two factors, one of which is a perfect square? Well, yes, 4 times 5 is 20. 4 is a perfect square, 5 is prime. So I get x equals plus or minus I times the square root. Instead of 20, I'm going to put 4 times 5. So x equals plus or minus. Now the square root of 4 simplifies. The square root of 4 is 2, so I'm going to write that in front of the I. So I get 2i times the square root of 5 because the square root of 5 does not simplify. So that is one way of writing my two solutions. X equals plus or minus 2i times the square root of 5. Notice the plus or minus indicates two solutions. If you're asked to write the two solutions out individually, you'd get x equals 2i the square root of 5 and x equals negative 2i the square root of 5.